shall we spend our time? For me, this has been the most fundamental question. I've been asking this question all my life. In a world that has infinite things to do and see, we must choose. There are infinite possibilities of becoming, but we are finite beings. The answer to the question, how shall we spend our time, becomes very important to how successful or unsuccessful our lives will be. Everything is right here, right now. Every right, every wrong, every up and every down. We are free to choose and choose again from an infinite amount of choices that are always changing and in flux. Nothing holds for us. Every moment, everything is up for grabs. I've always had a bias to action. I've always loved to take risks, to challenge that what is. As President Andrew Jackson once said, I was born for the storm, and a calm does not suit me. I could not agree more. And this started early on. I grew up in a household with little stability, save for my hardworking mom and my granny. For me, conflict and struggle are what formed me from the very beginning. As many of you here can attest, I've always enjoyed pondering the imponderables and the telling of stories. I believe stories are everything. The stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, and the stories by which we value and judge the world by. And in 2014, my pondering and storytelling kicked into high gear by way of therapy. At that time, my answers to the question of how shall we spend our time, more often than not, were becoming disruptive and destructive to my dearest family and oldest friends. The relationships and structures I had spent a lifetime building were being impaired because my struggles to navigate an infinite world with a finite body. And this was not conducive with my most important life choices. So with the strong encouragement of Tina, pardon me, I landed at the office of Dr. Carl Janash. Reluctantly. Dr. Janash is an idea merchant, and when I showed up, I was running hot. Barely street legal, as some say. And I was stepping on and breaking many of my best relationships and achievements. But at the time, I didn't see a problem. I thought the problem was with everyone else, in fact. And I expressed this to Tina and Dr. Janash many times over when I would phrase it in this way. I'm sure that the wives of Davy Crockett, Caesar, Christopher Columbus, Evel Knievel, all wish they had gone to see a therapist as well, and that, where would that have landed them? So why should I be here? But it was Dr. Janash who patiently pointed out to me that even rockets and planes must land and come in for maintenance, or else they'll fall and crash. And he helped me fully appreciate how we always make choices about what we do. And every choice has a trade-off. Some taking us to where we want to go, and some far away from it. If we only have a finite body and a finite time, not all of our choices will help us be successful and get the outcomes that we want. Just because there's an infinite world does not mean we can do all these things. Not all of our life choices always fit together. He helped me to appreciate that we always need to focus. Dr. Janash then introduced me to the life of the mind and to the most exciting philosophers, writers, thinkers. We began reading books together. He calls it bibliotherapy. And I discovered the world of philosophy and literature. All of my excessive energy that went into all kinds of places was suddenly channeled via the world of the mind. And I started putting much more focus and intention into my life. In Nietzsche's words, I sublimated my energy. We read Alistair McIntyre and Alan Bloom, Walter Kaufman and Richard Rorty, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Alfred Schultz, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud and William James, Birger Luckman, Fukuyama, Wittgenstein, Vladimir Nabokov, Neil Gaiman, Friedrich Nietzsche, eventually Werner Stegmeyer, and many, many more. Now, all these guys were all writing around, about, or arguing with Nietzsche. So we decided to go right to the source and beginning reading Nietzsche. Digging deep into Nietzsche was most exciting for me. I was moved by how he put in the most powerful language, precisely that which I'd been living, doing, and thinking all my life. In the most beautiful words. And electric, Nietzsche stressed creativity, authenticity, individuality, commitment, and that one is continually becoming. I've always felt that things are in flux, that nothing holds forever, and that we continually have to create in order to be successful. I loved his notion of living dangerously. That is, we have to challenge ourselves again and again if we want to grow and become, and that we have to act and take risks. Life is always already dangerous, and it's all about the question, how are we going to spend our time? And for me, it's also always been about how big are the bets we're willing to take. I told Dr. Janash, these are amazing, dangerous ideas. Does anybody have any idea what's in these books? I then started using many of these ideas, especially Nietzsche's philosophy on intentionally becoming who you are. And I saw a real positive change in my life. Philosophy gave me new tools and reinforced that the world is not just there, but that it is up for grabs, and that we can shape this world creatively. The world is not just an unchanging thing, but we're constantly creating it. From there, I looked to attend some academic seminars and conferences at Vanderbilt University. I was searching for folks that might share my ideas and passion, and I was sure that I would find a Nietzschean overman at some of these seminars. Someone who was constantly becoming, adapting, living on the edge, and living dangerously. But what I found was a little different. From there, I became a member of the Nietzsche Society, and I received the Journal of Nietzsche Studies. And in the very first issue of the first article I read was Nietzsche's Orientation Towards the Future. And it was authored by Werner Stegmeyer and translated by Reinhard Müller. And the article blew me away. And I wanted more. So I began looking for more books and papers by Dr. Stegmeyer. There were only a few papers in English, and all of his books were in German, so I personally reached out to Dr. Stegmeyer and Reinhard, and then I flew down to Austin, like any of us would do, where Reinhard was getting his PhD. We philosophized for the day at a Starbucks about orientation. I thought I was going to kidnap him, I think, you know. And we agreed to translate an abridged version of Dr. Stegmeyer's 800-page German book, Philosophy of Orientation. At first, I wanted the book translated just for myself, and that's because I just wanted the knowledge for myself. But then we decided to get it published. And from there, I flew to Germany in the summer of 2017 to meet Dr. Stegmeyer in Berlin at Hotel Adlon, right next to the Brandenburg Gate. And then we've attended a couple of conferences together in Sils Maria, Switzerland. The conferences are always in German, so Reinhard goes as my translator. And the three of us take very long hikes to the Swiss Alps, and we stop to philosophize often, about half hour at a time. And Dr. Stegmeyer describes to me in the most captivating way, for example, Nietzsche's poem, O Mankind Pray, and Nietzsche's idea of the eternal reoccurrence of the same, right next to the pyramidal rock where Nietzsche had this idea. Dr. Stegmeyer is a fascinating and brilliant philosopher who is capable of explaining the most difficult ideas in a simple and beautiful language. The article that excited me so much, Nietzsche's Orientation Towards the Future. It's about how we orient ourselves in time. How sometimes our horizons are wider. Sometimes they're more narrow. We sometimes have to endure difficult times that we have to focus on the most nearest goals. But then our horizons open up again and we focus on the most distant goals. Life is orientation, and that means we are constantly shifting and adapting because reality is always shifting and changing. Life is always surprising, and the more dangerous we live, the more surprising life will be. Dr. Stegmeyer was using a new philosophical language, the philosophy of orientation, through which he redescribed and made new many of Nietzsche's ideas in a much clearer, simpler, and a more everyday fashion. For example, the will to power is redescribed as the coping or mastering of new situations which are more or less challenging. I was fascinated by the notion that we are always trying to find our way successfully, that we are always reorienting ourselves because everything is in flux. The language of orientation resonated with me, about flux, about coping and mastering, about the importance of routines, about how there are no certainties, but only footholds, signs, clues, and indicators, and the importance of abbreviations. Philosophy then became not only intellectually stimulating and an outlet for my energy, but it also gave me new ideas, concepts, and moves from which to approach my business and life in new ways. It provided, in the words of William James, a cash value. This philosophy of orientation opened up new language games and helped me see things others were not seeing. So it became very practical in helping me process a fast-paced and fast-growing business world. I had, as it were, new tools, new lenses from which to view things in a new way. It allowed me to see how different disciplines speak very different languages and orient themselves in very different ways with different standpoints and perspectives. For example, lawyers, politicians, executives, bankers, teachers, family, academics, friends, you name it, all have different perspectives, orientations, and language games. And if you want to be successful, you have to be able to orient yourself to each of their orientations well. With the philosophy of orientation, I was able to see how no orientation is the right or final one. So in order to be more flexible, one needs to have more points of views, more perspectives, so that you have more moves and can adjust better. Options are always good. And the person with the most moves usually wins. Whether we like it or not, reality surrounding us is always changing. And if we see things not as factual certainties, but as indicators, footholds, signs, or clues, then we are much better able to embrace this change. The simple fact of putting something into words already helped me gain a kind of control over it. Discovering all this was very powerful, exciting, and eye-opening for me. And so, the idea of a foundation was born. My historical hero, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, once said, "I hate everything that merely instructs me without quickening or directly instructing my activity." The idea of a foundation was born from a bias to action, from a desire to put ideas into life and to make reality out of them. And what I love about this philosophy of orientation is that it is something new and novel. A new philosophy that came from a small town somewhere in northeastern Germany, and nobody seems to have heard of it. And I want to share with others a philosophy that was so impactful on me. And I see so much potential in it. Via this philosophy, I believe there is much that can be done within these concepts. Its rich, everyday language can be very beneficial to all sorts of people, just as it has been to me and far beyond academia. I also appreciate the ethos that I hear in this philosophy. I perceive a call for courage in it. If there are no certainties and everything is always shifting, we need courage to affirm this shifting. This philosophy provides new lenses to see reality in a new and different way, to see the surprises of the world, and to cope and master our ever-changing world. And most of all, I admire Dr. Stegmeyer, for he had the courage to make this claim of beginning in an entirely new way in philosophy, of writing a new first philosophy. I've always admired courage, and this is the courage in the world of the mind, especially today where much of academia, at least to me, seems so narrow and constricted and confined to the small world of the university. And this philosophy moves beyond these strict limits. So, to come back to the question I raised in the beginning, how shall we spend our time? This foundation is my response to this question. Thank you.